Morning, everybody. Lovely to see you guys. Glad you're all here. And we got a couple of things to talk about this morning. Just a couple of things. But first off, it really is wonderful to see you guys. It's wonderful to have your faith in the room. And it's wonderful to be able to worship together. What a cool thing that's been. All that being said, some of you are probably aware that our Governor Kate Brown has issued an freeze order. So this is starting this coming Wednesday and will last for 2 weeks with the possibility of 4. What this means for us is that restaurants and movie theaters and all kinds of different businesses are shutting down and doing takeout only. Gatherings like ours are now being constricted, and so we're not going to be able to meet here on Sundays for the next 2 weeks at least, possibly longer. We've all kind of, I think, internally prepared ourselves that whatever we're told, that we have to remember that it could be more. But we're going to continue our live stream option. It's going to be happening on Sundays at 10:15 a.m., and we're hoping to resume our gatherings at 9 to 10:15 and 11:30 as soon as possible. So that's the plan of kind of what's going on here. A lot of other activities that are happening here in and around the building are also going to get adjusted and shut down for a couple of weeks as well, at least in terms of the gathering component of it. But I want to talk a little bit about that. It's going to lead a little bit into our sermon this morning in our Divided series to talk about the virus and about our response to the government, specifically in the moment like we're in now. But there is a bit of a tension that we're in right now, and it seems as if we're in a moment to respond to this virus in ways that are going to be inherently divisive. It seems as if that this virus itself, it's almost as if it is just thread the needle into the exact amount of seriousness to have to respond to it in fairly drastic ways. And at the same time, it also offers up the possibility for some people, whether they're temperamented more towards the cautious and careful or more towards the not as concerned about risk and more into personal responsibility side, to really take positions on this that are going to divide us apart. Our hope, obviously, is that this virus is certainly nothing that we think should pull the Church of Jesus apart. And so our decision to participate and cooperate, really, with what the governor has laid out and commanded in the state is actually something we see really, really important to do. Primarily because Christians' relationship with civil authorities is meant to be one of submission. I don't know how you feel about that word, but the Bible is very comfortable with that word and uses it quite frequently and backs it up with the life of Jesus quite fervently. Jesus himself submitted to governmental authorities in his own death, and they thought they were taking away his life, but he was actually giving away his life, and it was in that very process that the world has been saved. So that is the pattern by which Christians are meant to follow. And we say we're followers of Christ. Well, part of our followership of Christ in relationship to civil authorities is actually our obedience to them. The question then becomes, at what point does our obedience to civil authorities come to contradict our obedience to God or to the gospel? Or to the mission of God? When does that actually happen? And that's actually a very legitimate question. And many Christians are asking that question and wondering that question and even taking kind of sides on that question, and it's all a legitimate conversation to have. One of the things that's been helpful for me is we're a part of a church family that's actually global. They're called Every Nation Churches. So we're not just this independent little church here in Corvallis, just a one-off doing our own thing. We're actually accountable to and in submission to a broader family of churches. There's about 80 or so churches in North America, maybe a little bit more than that. But 1,000, maybe a couple thousand churches internationally. And the reason why that number is difficult to pin down is because we've got a lot of churches in places like Western Africa and Southeast Asia that multiply so quickly, even up into the Amazon region and stuff like that, that it's tough to keep track of the official number sometimes. In a good way, because God's doing some really cool things around the world. Last summer, we had our World Conference in Orlando, Florida. It was the first time I had been in North America in quite a long time. I was in Africa and Asia for a few rounds before that. And at the World Conference, there was over 80 nations represented. And one of the things I'm really thankful for in our spiritual family is that I get to see the world through a different lens other than just maybe a typical American lens. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong or bad about the American lens, and I'm not guilting anyone for that. It's just that there are different ways in which the world is experienced and the world is seen, and it's really awesome when you get to see things through there's lots of mutual ways we can benefit and help each other. And so I got to meet a few pastors from China, actually, at the World Conference. And it was really helpful to me. And so we exchanged information, and through that time, they actually wanted to bring me to China in order to teach on biblical theology and to teach on Genesis through Deuteronomy, which is something I do for a lot of churches. And so they wanted me to do that. When the virus hit, we started doing some things online, and I've done some teachings for them even recently over the last couple weeks, which has been super fun. And one of the leaders of our churches in China, of which we have hundreds and hundreds of churches there, representing tens of thousands of Christians, really cool move of God there. But one of our leaders is actually in Wuhan itself. And so there's churches that we have in China, some of which that are registered with the government and some that aren't. Some of you have heard about the underground in Church of China. Essentially, there's churches that are not approved by the government, but are just, God has moved and churches have formed and they are operating faithfully to the gospel, even though they're under the boot of the government. They have to do so with a lot of secrecy. Meetings like this would be very, very carefully constructed, where the government could come in at any moment, shut you down, imprison you, take away all kinds of financial things from your family and so forth. And that's happened to multiple of our pastors multiple times over. So all that being said, when you start listening to some of these Chinese underground church pastors and realizing the risks they have to take to do the very simple things like worship and teaching the scriptures, you realize that there is yet a difference between the idea of disobeying the government when it comes to actually preaching the gospel, when it comes to actually gathering together as his people, and between actually wanting to cooperate with the slowing down of a global and fairly serious pandemic. Those are different things. Even the underground churches in China cooperated with lockdowns, went online with Zoom and so forth, because they realized this wasn't a gospel issue per se for them, and they wanted to help participate in the saving of lives in their country and the eradication of the disease itself. It's helpful to see that perspective. So many times where I even want to just stand my ground and just say like, nope, this is a gospel issue. The scriptures have commanded us to gather together, which they have, and we need to do that regardless of what the government tells us to do. Well, like in one sense, like yes, I would be willing to disobey for that, and yes, I even would be willing to be imprisoned for that. But not when the situation is like it is, where we can actually bear witness to Jesus by the care we have for a broader community and joining together in like a global cause to actually stem the spread of this virus. I think this is a cool thing to unify over. I think it's a sad thing that we are deeply divided over it. And of all the things that we could say, I don't know. Sometimes people don't enjoy it when I say this thing, but it just seems to be so true. That this virus seems to be the most medium virus ever. And some of you are really offended I just said that. I'm not saying that it's not serious. I'm saying that it's not serious. I'm saying that it is so serious enough that we do have to take drastic measures to deal with it. If there's serious repercussions from it, there's obviously many, many deaths that have come out of this, both here and globally. It's all very serious. And yet, it's not like it's the Black Plague, and it's not like pandemics that the world has seen in the past, and it's not as if we are without resource like at times we've been in history, so much so that like you can reason and ration, like, well, children don't seem to be nearly as affected by it as adults, or for sure the elderly. Like, there's a lot of comorbidities that are contributing to a lot of the deaths, so it's not just the virus alone. And so that you can ration yourself through this thing to feel like maybe it's not quite as big of a deal as maybe some of these government bodies are actually making of it. And therefore, we can actually find this just split over it. Now, the sad thing about this is it seems to it's not the virus's fault, it's the match that was lit, but what it's lit is just the major amount of explosive gas in our culture that is just ready to divide based on temperament, personality, and politics. And what would be great if the church could actually cooperate in a moment where we could unify over this thing and overcome a common enemy. And that's what we're trying to contribute to. I realize that there are all kinds of constitutional rights we've been given by our country, but again, my primary allegiance isn't to this country, and I don't have constitutional rights in the kingdom of heaven. I have a king. You know how kings work? Kings don't give you rights. You don't stand before the king and demand your rights. That doesn't go well. You have a father who loves you very, very much. That goes way better. But it's not based on some constitutional system where, Father, I have a right to this and I demand this from you. No. Imagine coming to, your kids coming to you in your house and telling you that. Like, Father, I have a right to this and I demand it of you. Like, well, I am the sovereign king of this kingdom. You know what I mean? And that usually does not go well. I love you. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to care for you. But the demanding of rights usually is only necessary when there is a lack of love and trust. And in the kingdom, that's what we have. A good, all-powerful God, and our tether to him and his care for us is based on his radical love and our trust of him. I'm thankful for the freedom of religion. I'm thankful for the freedom of assembly. I'm thankful for all of my constitution. I'm not poo-pooing that at all. I'm thankful for it. What I am saying is sometimes there are causes by which we make sacrifices for the greater good, and Christians, in my opinion, should be leading the way in that, not dragging their feet in it. I respect that there's differences of opinion on this. I respect that many of you maybe see this whole situation slightly differently, but we're not doing this simply just because we're bending or don't have a spine. We're doing this out of a conviction that we really believe this is what the scriptures would actually call us to do in a moment like we're in. So we're hoping this is as short as possible. And I also realize that this government, overreach and stuff, it doesn't feel great. I for sure am aware of history, and things can have slippery slopes. And I'm also aware that if persecution does come to the church, it's not going to come in some obvious way where people come and say, we hate Christians, we're shutting you down. It's going to come in the name of justice or equality or love or compassion or tolerance or whatever. It's going to come in the name of that somehow slipped in on the underside of it. I realize all this, and yet I do believe that we have this opportunity to join together with our broader community and help be a part of the solution and not the problem. So that's what we're going to do. So that's what's happening as far as that. Thank you guys for your cooperation, and thank you guys for just being really flexible with all this. If nothing else, we're learning how to do that. Now, when I first heard about the freeze order personally, I was laughing, first of all, because they called it a freeze order. They just changed the name of it. I remember what this was. You did this before. It was a lockdown. Why are you calling it a freeze order? Sometimes I wonder, are we really that stupid? Yes, we probably are that stupid. We just think oh, they changed the number. This is different somehow. No, I remember this. We had to stay home. Our kids went crazy, and so did we. I remember what that was like. And I feel like it is this slow kind of torturous process of social isolation, of uncertainty about the future, and a constant questioning of how much of all this is even being politically motivated versus it being really rooted in what is actually the best actual policy for us right now. I wonder about all that kind of stuff, and you wonder about all of it as you're searching on your computers and locked into the algorithms that Google has aligned you with and getting fed the information that you probably want to see. And I remember that. And so what I do remember from that time and into this whole pandemic period in general, and what I do sense even as we move forward, is there's going to be a need for perseverance, endurance. This has been a hard time. I've said this multiple times over in multiple contexts, both to the Chinese pastors, to North American pastors, and here in this church, that the true pandemic is both now and will historically prove to be not COVID-19, but the mental health and anxiety crisis we're experiencing right now. I see it firsthand. Maybe some of you don't, but anxiety levels are super high. The extreme problems of mental health, marital conflicts, relational conflicts, family conflicts, you name it, have been really high. The amount of crisis counseling that I've had to do in the season has been extraordinarily high. And we've seen some really extreme and terrible things happen as a result of this time, as people have been very, very isolated. Turns out, the Bible's right about a lot of things, including that humans are relational beings. And when you separate us, we don't do well. Science can tell you that. Neuroscience can tell you that. The human brain cannot exist in isolation. It literally was not made to do that. We know that scientifically, but we also know it very well scripturally. And so what I do know is that even as we participate in a freeze, call it whatever you want, as we participate in that, there's blowback to that. There's economic blowback, there's emotional blowback, there's relational blowback to that. And if you're not taking into consideration the holistic reality of the situation and you're just pumping up one side of the issue, you're becoming very blind to what I believe is going to be a far greater issue down the road. So with all that in our sight and not being blind to any of that, I want to cooperate with this, but I also want to mitigate as much as possible just how difficult this is going to be for many of us on a social and an emotional level. Hopefully it is just 2 weeks, but even as this pandemic increases, it's just been tough. We can't relate to the community of people we're used to relating to, and we've become, I think, far more appreciative of how much that has implanted into our souls. People caring for us, loving us, knowing us, even the simple questions like, how are you and how are you doing? That stuff matters to us because it's wired us to be interdependent as loving creatures, loving God and one another. And when that starts getting taken away, even in physical spaces, it matters. And we all know now, like Zoom fatigue is a real thing. It's nice, it just does not replace actual, real-life human contact. It just doesn't. It doesn't. And so we need to be mindful of this, especially as Christians. And I have a word I believe that I think God wants to share with us out of the book of Romans. So let's take a look there, shall we? Let's take a look there. Romans chapter 5. Romans is a dope book. You should totally go read if you haven't yet. There's a lot there, and you'll spend the next 1,000, 2,000, whatever plus years meditating on all the depths of its theology. All that to be said, let's just look at a little chunk here this morning. We'll start in verse 3, which says, not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings. Because we know that suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance character, and character hope. And hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured out into our hearts. So this is actually a common thread that you'll see throughout the New Testament of perseverance producing things in us. We're actually supposed to consider it all joy when we go through trials of many kinds because it's producing in us a level of perseverance. It's the idea that simply like we are actually building up our endurance, like a marathon runner that's pushing themselves, like running on the daily. They're actually expanding their capacity to whether it's in a race and you're expanding your capacity for your oxygen intake levels and your ability to run farther or faster, but on the spiritual levels, it's increasing our capacity to be able to love God and others through incredible adversity. When it says that perseverance produces character, character is a word in the Bible that relates to the idea of being tested. Character is something that happens to you after you've gone through some kind of test or trial. Meaning that it's not just some kind of moral state you have to make good decisions in bad environments. It's what's produced in you when you actually go through difficult times. There's multiple ways in the Bible that God actually tests his people. One of the most famous times of it was Abraham and Isaac in Genesis chapter 22. And God tested Abraham by asking him to sacrifice his son Isaac, something he never had any intention of actually asking him to go through with. But he tested him to see, would Abraham ultimately trust God above all things, or would he hold on to his son? And Abraham, in that moment, it's one of his finer moments, did trust God, and God said, now I know that you fear me, that you'll even give up the son, your only son, whom you love, for me. Oh, that's a higher level of trust. And that was a character moment. That was something birthed on the inside of Abraham, something revealed in Abraham. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing. It's almost like the idea of like a kitchen sponge. How many of y'all have ever done the dishes at home and looked at that kitchen sponge, right? And it looks relatively clean until you kind of soak it with some water and give it a squeeze and just see the nastiness that comes out of it, right? Like that's the idea. When our lives get squeezed, we both see more of who we really are and give God the opportunity to do something differently on the inside of us. And what perseverance does when we go through suffering, and I'm not trying to equate this moment to some of the suffering that my friends in China have had to go through, physical torture like they've had to go through, like Christians, even if you've been paying attention, well, you won't find it on the mainstream news, but martyrs and kidnappings in places like Africa and Asia have been going up significantly in the recent months and weeks, and many Christians have been losing their lives and so forth. It's been actually quite incredible. I'm not trying to compare that level of Christian suffering, what we're going through, but what's also not helpful is to simply deny that this isn't some level of frustration or adversity or suffering, and that we have to emotionally process through this moment. And what God wants to do is bring us into a level of perseverance. Perseverance to know that the pain won't last and God's kingdom will. The problems won't last, but Jesus' promises will be faithful. Perseverance is what does that to us. It stamps us with the character that trusts God even in difficult situations. Because how many of you know you can say you trust God, but it takes some kind of challenging situation where it's difficult to trust God to know where your real faith level is at. It's easy to say, I trust God with my money. Well, has your bank account ever been so low you weren't sure where your next meal was coming from? Because that's a different level of having to trust God. You say you trust God, but would you write that really huge, uncomfortable check to the cause God called you to do so, even if it violated all of your long-term 401k plans? Different level. And something happens in moments like this where we get squeezed. and we see what comes out. And we cooperate with the Holy Spirit to allow him to form in us a greater perseverance that builds character and leads to hope. And why hope? Why is hope at the end of this thing? Because when you realize you've taken all that the world can throw at you, and you've just been stamped with an eternal weight of glory on the inside of you as a result, the world's going to pass away, but that eternal character in you never will. And so all it does is build in you this anticipation that God's going to be faithful to all of his promises, not just to walk me through this messy life of a moment I'm in now, but he's going to be faithful to actually return and make this whole thing new. And one of the things that suffering does is it just ruins your appetite for the things of this world, because you were made for another world. Not a world that's somewhere way off, but a world right here in the midst of this one that Jesus is actually going to renew. And when you realize all of this world that can be taken away from you, you realize what you still have and will ultimately have, and it just produces hope. And there's something beautiful, especially when God's people become increasingly dissatisfied with this world and completely disavow so many of the doctrinal slogans of this world, like YOLO, you only live once, living my best life now. All this is just cultural garbage that completely violates the amazing promises that Jesus had, that your best life is not now, it's to come. And we are not called to live as if this is all we have. We know we have far more to come. And so we endure suffering, not as if it's taking away our limited moment to maximize and be our best selves. We're enduring this moment with hope. And it actually produces some level of joy, because we realize, this is temporary. COVID, temporary. What's permanent is the overwhelming peace of God he's supplying me in the midst of this moment. That's eternal. And every good thing that God is doing right now is only ever going to increase into eternity, and that I can trust. This world can go crazy. Everything could fall apart. Even the foundations of this country be wrecked. But Jesus' kingdom never will. And it takes moments of adversity and suffering when God brings his people through that to see that more clearly and to have that weight of eternity stamped on the inside of us. And that's what I want. That's what I want. I don't want to be satisfied on the things of this world and not just have the latest iPhone and gadget, or just be more hyped up about the next technological advance than I am about the return of Jesus. I want him, and I want to make sure I represent him with the amount of joy and character that he wants to build in me. So all that being said, I just want to give you guys a couple of pastoral encouragements as we head into these next couple of weeks, where we're going to go online at 10:15, and we'll at least be more physically distanced. The first is, can I call you to persevere in prayer? I think the sovereign, providential, divine timing of God is amazing. And the fact that over the last month we've been forming prayer groups of people that have been getting together, praying together, and connecting in prayer together is just perfect. Because what this means moving forward is that we'll still have a place, even if we're not physically connected, we'll be more connected in spirit, people that know what's going on in our lives and able to pray for us. And I think this is a huge weight off of our shoulders that can help even our mental, emotional, and spiritual health significantly. Now, when I set the goal for what I wanted to see happen from this, I was hoping that we would have a 100 person hours of prayer by the end of the year. But I knew that goal was pretty low. I was just wanting a win, to be honest with you. I just wanted to win. That's all I wanted to do. I didn't care if I had to lower the basket down to like 4 feet. I just wanted to dunk really hard on it. That's all I wanted to do. So I realized I was selling you guys a little bit short. And sure enough, after just like a month or so, you guys have well over 100 hours already put in. That's 100 collective hours of us praying together already. I sleep better at night. I don't know right or wrong, you be the judge. I sleep better at night knowing that that's true. I sleep better at night knowing that this church is praying. I sleep better at night knowing of God's hand of protection is firmer, that God's hand is moving, that marriages are being held together, that kids are being supported and loved. I sense the weight of God's prayers when you all pray, especially when we're all praying together in moments like this. It's incredible. Would you persist in prayer? Because one of the ways that prayer works is through persistence. Not just saying the right magical prayer one time and voila. But it's beautiful when we persist in prayer. One of my favorite places to go in Oregon is Silver Falls State Park. And I always take the obligatory sort of tourist photos when I go. Can we show that up here? So this is like, I think, South Falls at Silver Falls State Park. And you can see where the water is falling down on the rocks. So if we can zoom in, I'll show you a little more closely what it looks like. You can see it's essentially just falling on one giant boulder. But watch what the water is doing to the rock. The water is splitting the rock into an oblivion. And how does water defeat rock? We would think of rock. No, rock is immovable. Rock is impenetrable. Rock is a thing that beats water every time, unless the water is persistent. And then the rock doesn't stand a chance. It's why in the game rock, paper, scissors, water isn't allowed, because if you just played long enough, water would always win. Water always will win because it's persistent. And it's the same way with prayer. Jesus told the parable about the persistent widow that came before an unjust judge. And simply by her persistence, she got the ruling that she wanted. Not because of the grace of the judge, but simply because he was just overwhelmed by her persistence. And Jesus said, approach your Father in the same way. Not because he's unjust and unwilling, but break through all the things that might inhibit you from praying, because in your persistence, you will see breakthrough. Ask, seek, knock. These three commands from Jesus' own sermon were about ask and keep on asking, seek and keep on seeking, knock and keep on knocking. And this is where God does his best work. Let's persevere in prayer. We can mitigate so much of the social and spiritual isolation simply by praying together, even if it's over phone for a short length of time. If you're not in a prayer group, holler at us. We'd love to get you aligned into one. And here's one of the coolest things. You guys, this was the real desire from this thing, because I know some of y'all are dope prayer people, and that's great. We've heard multiple stories of people that have never prayed before out loud, taken the amazingly courageous step to join a prayer group, and praying out loud in front of people for the first time. That's insane. That's so cool. Can I just honor you if that's you? That's incredible. That's exactly what we love to see. Because it's one thing to come to church for the first time. That takes a step of courage. It's one thing to actually sing a worship song. Totally a courageous thing. It's another thing to hear people that are praying with some theological language that you can't even understand. It sounds Shakespearean because they're using big words like, thou sovereignty hast held us, O God, and we trust thee. And you hear all that and dude, the best I got is rub-a-dub-dub. Thank you for the crub. It's the best I got. But the best you got is all that Jesus is calling you to give. Talk to your Father. Let's do it together. Let's grow in this thing. And if this church gets activated with the greater culture of prayer, my goodness, mountains will move. Jesus is faithful to his promises, but he wants to partner with his people in prayer. And if we would be like this mighty river, faithfully persistent, not getting discouraged, how are we ever going to move this rock? But if we would just not turn off the faucet, but keep it pouring out, water always wins. Water always wins. Secondly, I want to encourage you guys to persevere in resisting fear. And I specifically want to speak to some of you who are having a really hard time with this virus, that are able to hide behind just a lot of the strict adherence to the commands we're receiving from our government. But beneath all that, you guys know we're complaining about that, and we, even in this Sunday moment, we work so hard to make this moment safe. You guys are complying with it. You register ahead of time. You come in. You sit apart. You wear masks. This moment is an incredibly safe moment, and we have a huge and amazing servant team that makes it happen. Huge shout out to them. But if we don't deal with the reality that many of us are just carrying an underlying fear, and maybe using the virus to vent that and spew that, be it on social media or in our families, we have to come to terms that Jesus did not give us a spirit of fear, but one of power, love, and a sound mind, or self-control, depending how you interpret that word. May I call you to rise above fear? Because even as we comply with governmental regulations right now, we still are responsible to give a witness that is not one of fear, but of faith, of hope. That you know what? All that this virus has exposed is what has always ever been true. Human beings' lives are extremely fragile. So is society at large. But God is a rock that we can actually rely upon. And we can build our lives on him. And we can trust him even in dark moments like this. And if the people of God could have that kind of spirit, if we could cooperate to help mitigate this virus, but at the same time not just give in to the fear of it, because let me just speak really, really real for a moment. When people just speak out of a place of fear, using the language of control and law, all it does is just evoke people on the other side to want to rebel that much more. Guys, I want to wear masks. I'm happy to wear masks. And even I am just repulsed by masks sometimes by the way some people spew their fear about the virus. It just is that thing that just is ignited in us almost involuntarily. And I'm sure the more people just seem really rebellious to it, it can just spark those kind of fearful people among us like to want to lean in even more. But if we could rise above all of our anxious reactions to it and actually find language of faith to cooperate in this problem, but to offer the greater solution that you know what, we're never going to get beyond our fragility. There's 1,000 things leaving this door that want to kill you. But there's one person in the universe that wants to save you and give you life more abundant and a life that can never, ever, ever be taken away. We are the people of faith that need to have that message. We need it now more than ever. Can I call you to resist the fear and rise up in faith?